One of the most urgent tasks for our country is to decisively defeat the climate hysteria hoax.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday, and this is the best day of the week. Not just because the weekend is almost here, but because this is the day the Heartland Institute broadcasts the Climate Realism Show. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm Executive Vice President of the Heartland Institute, coming to you from very, very, very windy northern Illinois. My power went out and just came back on right before the show. Let's keep our fingers crossed that it stays on for the next hour or so. The Heartland Institute is an organization that's been around for 42 years, and we are known as the leading global think tank pushing back on climate alarmism. Heartland and this show bringing the data, the science, the truth that counters the climate alarmist narrative you've been fed every single day of your life. There is nothing else quite like the Climate Realism Show streaming anywhere. So I hope you will bring friends to view this live stream every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And also like, share, subscribe, and be sure to leave your comments underneath the video. We do read those and enjoy it. And these all convince YouTube's very mysterious algorithm to smile upon this program. And that gets it in front of even more people. And a reminder here, because big tech and the legacy media are not big fans of the way we cover climate and energy on this program, Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. So if you want to support this program, and I really hope you do, please visit heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS. And you can join other friends of this program who help bring the show to the world every single week. We also want to thank, before we get started, our streaming partners, junkscience.com, CFACT, What's Up With That, the CO2 Coalition, and our friends at Heartland UK Europe. Let's get started. We got a big show today. We have with us, as usual, Anthony Watts. He's Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute and publisher of the world's most viewed website on climate change, What's Up With That. Sterling Burnett, the Archbishop of Canterbury, whose day job is the director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center for Climate and Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute. Linnea Lueken, Research Fellow for Energy and Environment Policy at Heartland. And thank you to our producer, Andy Singer, who makes the show flow so well behind the scenes. And we are so happy to welcome a special guest, David Legates. David is with the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. He's a former professor of climatology in the Department of Geography and Spatial Sciences at the University of Delaware. He was also the official climatologist for the first state, also known as the Blue Hen State. The blue hen, it does exist. It's a chicken. It's a very important and noble chicken, but a chicken nonetheless. David is also going to be presenting at our climate conference coming up on April 8th and 9th. So, David, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Before we get started with the show, you're friends with everybody here on this program and at the Heartland Institute, and we're very happy to have you on the program today and also speaking at our conference in April. And later on, we're going to get into a little bit of what you were going to present at that conference. But maybe you can let our audience know briefly a little bit about your battles for applying actual climate scientists to policy in the first Trump administration. You did have a position in the first Trump administration. What was that, and how long did it last?
Briefly, yeah, this goes on and on and on and on. I mean, I can go back to times at the university. I briefly went to NOAA for, I guess it was a couple months, and then the White House realized I was in the wrong place. So they moved me over to the White House after the election, and I got attacked by many members of the deep state. Essentially, the Biden administration charged me with using White House logo illegally. And that would have been a three felony charges, 15 years in jail, $15 million in fine. The only place this ever really appeared was in Politico. there was never a court case. There was never charges filed because there was nothing behind it. But the media had a nice field day on it, and of course they did.
Of course they did. Yeah. Well, as you can see, you could just tell by looking at him, David Legates is a very dangerous man who needs to be opposed by all means necessary, or else the truth might get out about the climate. So anyway, we'll get into that a little later. Again, welcome to the show. Very happy to have you here with us. And let's get started as we always do, covering the crazy climate news of the week. Hit it, Andy. Thank you very much, Bill Nye. Our first item, it's on the thumbnail today, and this comes from the New York Times. We've labeled it Solar Space Lasers, but the headline in the New York Times is a big nightlight in the sky. Startup wants to launch a space mirror. The subhead to the article says the company is seeking FCC approval to test an idea to reflect sunlight to Earth at night, possibly powering solar panels. Critics say it could be bad for people and wildlife. Wow, you don't say. It's a crazy idea, so let's get into it. Story reads, a startup company wants to light up the night with 50,000 big mirrors orbiting Earth, bouncing sunlight to the night side of the planet to power solar farms after sunset, provide lighting for rescue workers, and illuminate city streets, among other things. Scientists have questions about that. Yeah, I don't think you need to be a scientist to have questions about that, but there you go. If the FCC approves this crazy plan, a test satellite could get a ride into orbit as early as this summer, and the FCC's public comment period on this application closes on Monday. So you've been warned. Get over to the FCC's website. Quote from the story, we're trying to build something that could replace fossil fuels and really power everything, said Ben Nowak, Reflect Orbital's chief executive, in an interview. He said the company has raised more than $28 million from investors. So for those of you at home, a startup getting $28 million from investors, and most of it I'm guessing is pledged, not actually given in cash, that's pathetic. Somebody pitching an idea to have an IA robotic toilet wipe your butt before you get up could probably get 10 times that. Anyway, the New York Times does admit that this idea is controversial, but it's not controversial enough to keep off their pages. Anyway, the New York Times writes here, opponents say the mirrors could distract airplane pilots, mess up astronomical observations, and interfere with circadian rhythms, the light and dark cycles that help people, creatures, and plants know when to wake and sleep, when to bloom, when to migrate, and so forth. All right, that's enough. That's enough from that story. We actually, looking at this, as we were talking about it amongst ourselves, it brought to mind this scene from the James Bond franchise, and it's pretty funny. Andy, could you play this?
The spy runs, but he cannot hide. Icarus will lock onto the heat signature and concentrate the sun's power. Hey, boss, keep it to your time.
Trying to get the back off.
Global warming is a terrible thing.
Yes, global warming is a terrible thing. Thanks actually to Donald Kendall, who's on a lot of our shows and is our graphics designer and the head of our Emerging Issues Center. He's a big fan of the James Bond franchise. That is from Die Another Day. Pierce Brosnan's last appearance. Not so glamorous, I'm afraid. But anyway, that's just kind of funny. But Linnea, on a more serious note, perhaps, why does every Bond villain plan to fix the climate get serious coverage in places like the New York Times anyway?
Because it's goofy. I don't know. I didn't have time before this to go and check the comments section if they still have one at the New York Times. Some of those publications do still have them, to see what the general idea was from, what the feeling was from people who actually read the New York Times and take it seriously. The which is a shrinking demographic, I believe. But it's the same thing with the Antarctica curtain, right? But this is on the energy production side. And the first thing that popped into my head, other than like killer space lasers, is one, I'm sure that the people in rural areas who live out where these like solar installations are really going to appreciate having night cycle taken away. Like they're just gonna love that. That's gonna be so good for the environment. That's gonna be so good for everyone's like sanity who live in proximity to these things. Just completely and utterly thoughtless. The other thing is, we keep being told that solar is super cheap. It's like, does an energy source that's super cheap benefit from having a massive, like 50,000 super huge mirror space array installed in order to improve its efficiency? Like, where does that math work out? It makes no sense at all, and that's probably why they only have $28 million invested.
It's a whole new source of space junk floating around.
Yeah,
I didn't see that mentioned, gosh. I guess my thought is, well, no, I won't go there. Look, I wish not to only get shadow banned but arrested, so I'm not going to go there. I'll just say the idea, the only justification for solar on a massive scale and wind on a massive scale is to fight climate change and CO2 emissions. This is going to be changing climate on a massive scale. These mirrors themselves will change the climate on Earth. I thought we were against that. And if CO2 is not a threat, this is even more idiotic than the solar and wind, which have some marginal benefit, at least in some locations.
I think there is one benefit that people are not paying attention to with this, is that if they deploy these, 50,000 mirrors or something like that up in space to, turn night into day, we won't have to worry about vampires anymore.
And we won't have to worry about daylight savings time.
It'll be daylight all the time.
It'll be daylight all the time.
Yeah. David, you've done, I remember a presentation you gave several years ago. You were talking about crabs and the growth of crabs and all that stuff. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So maybe I could just go to you. It's like, wouldn't it just be a lot easier just to build a nuclear power plant that can be on at night without needing any sunlight to generate electricity, instead of this convoluted Bond villain Rube Goldberg machine in space?
Well, of course, and for a lot less cost. And part of the problem too is, I thought we were trying to cut down on the temperature of the planet. So if you're going to send more sunlight back to us, isn't that just going to increase carbon dioxide, or increase the warming of the planet? Isn't this counterintuitive?
And I want to talk about the emissions from the launches of 50,000 space lasers.
It's one of those things. They want money to study it, not money to do it, because nobody will ever pay to do it.
Yeah. Fantasy and engineering are completely different things.
Yep.
Well, all right. Well, keep your eye on the sky. We'll see if that ever comes to be, and we will truly live in one of the worst Bond movies ever. All right. Our next item here is we're apparently going to start bugging the Amazon bugs. This story comes to us from What's Up With That? Headline: Study: Global warming could kill half the insects in the Amazon jungle. There is literally nothing global warming can't do. This is a post from Eric Worrell at Anthony's What's Up With That website. And it cites a paper from Julius Maximilian from the University of Würzburg, one of the oldest universities in Germany. The title of the paper is Climate Change Pushes Tropical Insects to Their Heat Limit. It claims that up to half the insects in the Amazon region could be exposed to life-threatening heat levels due to progressive anthropogenic global warming. This is shown by a recent study by the universities of Würzburg and Bremen. Quote, current evaluations of the heat tolerance of insects such as moths, flies, and beetles paint a differentiated and at the same time alarming picture, explains the study's author. According to this study, insects' ability to tolerate high temperatures does not simply adapt to their respective environment. While species at higher altitudes can increase their heat tolerance, at least in the short term, many lowland species largely lack this ability. The study, published in Nature, makes it clear that tropical insects have only a very limited ability to adapt to climate change. Quote, rising temperatures could have a massive impact on insect populations, especially in regions with the world's highest biodiversity. Since insects fulfill central functions in ecosystems as pollinators, decomposers, and predators, there is a threat of far-reaching consequences for entire ecosystems, unquote. Anthony, let's start with you. You know, like a lot of the stories we put up in the crazy climate news of the week, this smells a little suspicious. I mean, if cockroaches could survive a nuclear war, do we really need to stop driving our SUVs to save the Amazon insects?
You know, I'm not the least bit worried about this for two reasons. Number one, as you pointed out, it's really tough to kill insects. They develop resistance to things like, well, you know, certain kinds of pesticides and so forth quickly. And so you end up with these resistant insects that, you know, learn to survive in the warmer climate, and there'll be just as many of them as before. The other thing is that this is another modeling-based study, and modeling studies can make all kinds of crazy projections that have no basis in reality, which is something we do on a daily basis, debunking these things at What's Up With That, as well as over at climaterealism.com. So I'm not the least bit worried about it. Yes, bugs are in our future, and they're there to stay.
My first thought is, as Anthony points out, it's a modeling study. I wonder what they built into the models concerning temperatures in this sense. We have been told since the global warming scare originated that the poles were going to warm faster than the rest of the globe and more. But along the equator, the temperature change will be minor or not at all. And guess where Brazil lies? Not in the North Pole, not in the South Pole. The equator cuts through part of Brazil. They are going to see very little temperature change and have seen very little temperature change. So that's one thing that the models get right. Temperatures along the equator aren't changing that much. So even if the insects in Brazil, you know, couldn't get along without air conditioning, you know, the humidity in the rainforest, as if they haven't adapted to high temperatures, you know, over hundreds of millions of years. It doesn't matter because the temperature's not changing there very much.
You know, there is one benefit to this, just like in the last study, that no one's really looking at, and that is if, in fact, when it gets warmer in the future and the insects are less and less, we won't have to worry about the edict to be eating the bugs.
Yep, for sure. And people in the comments have mentioned that as well. It's like, you know, we're going to eat the bugs, but we're also going to kill the bugs. And
I thought we were supposed to get giant bugs. I thought that was the promise.
No, that's only from nuclear. That's only from nuclear bomb and power. You missed that.
Yeah, I thought we were returning to like Cambrian conditions where we're going to have dragonflies the size of like a house cat.
Well, that's horrifying.
They've almost got those in Florida. They've got palmetto bugs down there. Have you ever seen those things?
Oof.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Let's move on to our third item, and that is never mess with the penguins. This comes from Fortune magazine. King penguins are a rare species seemingly benefiting from climate change. Here's why. Now, this story is actually from the Associated Press and Anthony Watts' personal favorite AP climate reporter, Seth Borenstein. Don't get triggered, Anthony. We're going to get your response a bit later. But he writes, The warming world has disrupted the timing for plant and animal reproduction, and it's usually bad news for species that depend on each other, like flowers blooming too early and pollinating bees arriving too late. But researchers have found the rare critter that's getting a boost from the change: king penguins. A new study of 19,000 king penguins in a sub-Antarctic island chain found their breeding is starting 19 days earlier than it did in the year 2000. Mating earlier has increased the breeding success rate by 40%, according to a study in Wednesday's journal Science Advances. Now, I'm going to stop here and note that the very same author for the Associated Press, Seth Borenstein, he linked to a story in the original story that he'd written himself from January of this year. And it said that earlier breeding seasons, wait for it, were a bad thing for penguins. The exact opposite of what he just wrote today. In fact, I don't have the link for it, Andy, I apologize. But he wrote, warming temperatures are forcing Antarctic penguins to breed earlier, and that's a big problem for two of the cute tuxedoed species that face extinction by the end of the century, a study said. So, Sterling, I've never seen you in a tuxedo. The penguin is not your spirit animal, but how can it be that global warming, supposedly caused by humans, is both horrible and good for penguins at the exact same time?
Well, I suppose it's possible. Some penguin species may not do as well, but the problem is, where's the data? Not modeling studies saying it will hurt some penguins. Where's the data? They've got data on the king penguins. I like the comment, by the way. This is a king's protest. No more king's protest. But it's just when species are doing better, it's a problem for the climate, and when they're doing worse, it's a problem for the climate. I should say, full disclosure, Seth Borenstein bought me dinner once. I've met him. He used to interview me. He doesn't interview me anymore. Once they stopped covering, giving any kind of balance to their stories on climate change, Seth stopped calling. So this is just one more scare story. And even though it's good news, he says, oh, most species are not. No, almost all species do better. There's only a few species on Earth that actually thrive in really, really cold temperatures. That's just a fact. The Arctic is not awash in biodiversity. Neither is Antarctica. Where biodiversity is highest is the oceans, which aren't freezing, and the jungles, the rainforests, which also aren't located in the Arctic or Antarctica. So it's just wrong to say, oh, most species are being damaged by climate. No, most species are being benefited. Biodiversity is increasing.
Yeah. David?
See, what you're forgetting is that global warming leads to things like more flooding, more droughts, more hurricanes, more tornadoes, and so does global cooling. So anything can do everything. Just depends on what story we would like to write this afternoon.
Yeah. Monsoons are getting better. The monsoons are getting worse. The monsoons are getting becoming less frequent. Hurricanes are speeding up.
Slowing down, whatever you want. Yeah.
Well, if a theory proves everything and is unfalsifiable, it's not really a theory or it's not science.
It's not what's called proper falsifiable. If there's no way to disprove what you just said, then there's no way it can possibly be true. Well, there has to be a solution that says, if this happens, then we're wrong. So we have a test. If I can just simply say, anytime you find something that's wrong, I just add that to the mix, then that's not the way science works.
Even if it contradicts what I had.
What you said 10 minutes ago. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think sometimes we call it p-hacking.
I wasn't familiar with that term.
Oh, it's just it's where you have all this data and stuff, and then you go hunting for a hypothesis to explain it. And in this case, the hypothesis is always that climate change is human caused and terrible. And no matter what data you have that says that things are like okay, or things are changing in one place or another, they're going to fit it into that hypothesis no matter what.
Yep.
Yep. Which is why, one, this show exists, and two, you very, very rarely see anybody on the other side of this debate anybody, because it doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
Well, because it's not science. Look, science
Right.
is a method. It's a way of discovering, answering why certain phenomena occur in certain ways. You propose a hypothesis, you develop a theory, and then you test it against reality. And the testing is the key. The more that it isn't falsified, the more likely, not the proof, you don't prove it, but the more likely that it is to be an accurate representation of what's going on. But the more it is falsified, the more you make certain predictions and they're wrong consistently, the less likely it is to be true. And climate change just doesn't work that way. It's not science.
Yeah. I mean, David, you've been studying the climate for a very long time, and you know, maybe you're not as much of an outlier in actually following the science as a lot of other scientists, but you know, I always think about, will they ever come around? Will some of these people that are pushing these unfalsifiable theories ever come around and actually examine the data, see the data, admit that they were wrong, and change their mind or change their position? It seems that is just, as a human being, that's a very hard thing to do. I mean, you have to look back at your career and realize, I've been wrong about everything for 20, 30 years. That's a difficult thing for a human being to do.
There are certain areas where you could do that, such as plate tectonics, Semmelweis, and the idea that you should wash your hands because bacteria get on it and contaminate things. You can back off on things like that. There's too much at stake here. We're changing the planet, not just changing the way in which the planet works from a climate sense. We're changing the economic system. And that's why this is the way to get global Marxism in here. Mm. And that is their ultimate goal at the end of time. And so they can never back out on this, because this is the way to get it done.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned it before. So I don't know if David's ever done this experiment, but so I've been on stage or at conferences discussing things with a number of climate scientists, probably about 7 to date, really people on the other side. And I ask each one of them, I say, look, I know what it would take to convince me that climate change, that humans were causing climate change and it was dangerous and that we had to stop using fossil fuels pretty quickly. I said, what would it take to convince you that you're wrong? 5 of those climate scientists, there was nothing. There was no answer. Mm-hmm. Nothing would falsify their belief. One of them, Michael Mann, had an answer. Like I said, I'll give him credit to this day. He provided an answer. For him, all it would take was for all of physics to be overturned. He said that. There were other people standing around when he said that. I said, really? The laws of conservation of energy and entropy? He goes, everything I ever learned about physics would have to be overturned for me to be wrong about climate change. Wow. Talk about hubris and ego. Climate change really is everything for him. But at least he gave an answer. The 7th scientist gave it the answer that I think, if there is an answer, it's the correct answer. And he said, time. And I said, what do you mean? Yeah. And he said, well, over time, more and more predictions and projections will either be proven true or false. And as they are wrong and the evidence mounts that they are wrong, we'll have to question the theory. That seemed like a pretty good answer to me.
Actually, I did the same thing late in the 1990s. I coordinated a meeting at the Houston Forum. There were people there like Stephen Schneider and other people as well on our side. And part of the final question I asked was, do you think in 5 to 10 years we will have an answer on climate change one way or another? And everybody said, yeah, in 10 years there will be enough data that by 2005 we will have a definitive answer to climate change. And here we are 20 years after that, and we still don't have a definitive answer.
Good point. Well, speaking of data, we're going to get to that in just 1 minute. Anthony Watts has an actual data collection update that's very important to get to. Before we get to that, though, it wasn't in the show notes necessarily, but as I mentioned at the top of the show, it's super windy here in northern Illinois. And a couple nights ago, severe weather came through and lots of tornadoes had landed in Kankakee, Illinois, basically went northeast through northern Indiana. And if you've ever driven around northern Indiana, you see that there are a lot of farmers' fields that are no longer growing crops, but are used for solar panel installations, massive solar installations. And wouldn't you know, when it's a battle between a solar installation and a tornado, the tornado is going to win every single time. And here was, you can see on the screen there that the tornado just carved a swath, of destruction through an enormous solar installation. This is just one of them, and it was in other places as well. And there's some homes that were destroyed. It was, not that far away from where I am. So I consider myself very lucky that those tornadoes didn't touch down near where I live. But maybe somebody could weigh in here. But this is now basically a Superfund site. This causes a lot of, there's toxic chemicals in these solar panels, and good luck taking all that out and trying to plant crops in it again, because the soil could be toxic. There's shattered glass everywhere. You can't graze animals on this anymore because they might be chewing glass. I mean, what a disaster in both sense of the word.
Yeah, I looked into that. So I've yet to find a single nuclear plant or coal plant or natural gas facility providing 700 megawatts of power, which is what this was, that has been taken out entirely by a natural disaster.
Well, Fukushima, there's that.
Yeah.
And they're bringing it back online. So I guess they can bring this solar back online. But I'll say this, Fukushima, how many years did it operate before the problem occurred?
Oh, I think it was 25, 30.
Yeah, 30. This is 3 years old.
Yeah.
Weather happens every year. We opened one in Texas. It had operated for 5 years, and we had a hailstorm. Wiped it out.
Yeah, I mean, if this storm had hail the size of grapefruits or my fist, it was unbelievable. I've never seen hail that big.
Well, it just shows that climate change doesn't like solar panels.
I'll just mention I woke up this morning in southern Delaware with 2 inches of snow on the ground.
Yeah.
It reminds me of something George Carlin said about plastics. They said maybe the Earth wants plastics for itself. And maybe what's going on here is the Earth is rejecting solar panels.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, obviously a nuclear power plant could be damaged by a tornado in that same area. But the point is, it's a much smaller target than that solar farm, that solar installation. That matters, that matters. Anyway.
It's hardened. It's hardened. A nuclear facility is hardened against all kinds of threats.
I'm not convinced a tornado. We've had tornadoes in Texas, and we've had tornadoes in Glen Rose. And we have a huge nuclear plant there. I've never heard of it being damaged by a tornado. Maybe the outbuildings, maybe the power lines running to it, but the core under that huge concrete protective barrier, I've never heard of that being damaged.
Yeah, much more hardened than this. Obviously, I mean, geez, it's ridiculous. But again, it makes that land unusable now in most respects.
Yeah, well, all it takes is for the storm. To pull up one of those solar panels or to rip off one of those solar panels, or even just to be carrying like fence posts or cows or whatever it is that the tornado is carrying along with it. And just like the debris damage from all of that is significant.
Yeah. I mean, you don't even need a tornado. That hail would have pounded it into dust.
Yeah. That's what it did in Texas.
Yep. All right.
And like you say, the leaching of all the chemicals from these panels, that's happening not just after a natural disaster. I covered a story in Climate Change Weekly a few issues ago where they'd done a study, and they found that solar panels, they're trying to make them more efficient, less heavy, thinner. As they're doing that, they're cracking. much more easily. Even in the warehouse, before they're even installed, they have already cracked. And so it turns out that they leach these chemicals around them. They did the study. They went under. They sampled the soil. And it's like, yep, this is leaching into the soil. So all of you people who have your solar panels on your home, even the ones that aren't cracked, though that's becoming more common, drip, drip, drip. Chemicals are leaching into your soil. Your house will soon be declared a Superfund site.
Yep. All right, we can wrap this up. Anthony, you have a quick story?
Yeah, I used to do television meteorology in Indiana at WLFI TV in Lafayette, and I saw a lot of storms like this way back when. And, you know, you talk about hail the size of grapefruits or your fist or whatever. Yes, I've seen that too. One of the funniest moments that ever happened in television broadcasting of weather happened in the late 70s when David Letterman was the weekend weatherman at WTHR in Indianapolis. And I remember this vividly because it just made me laugh, laugh, and laugh. They had a hailstorm going on down there in Indianapolis. And he got on the air and said, "There's hail coming down the size of canned hams."
Oh, yes. Back when David Letterman was funny. Those were the days.
Yeah.
You sure about that?
Right. All right. Well, Anthony, since we just threw the discussion over to you, let's keep it with you. And we have proof here of bad temperature readings. Now, this comes, Andy could put it on the screen. It doesn't 100% necessary, but we released at the Heartland Institute news this week that a new temperature study in Reno finds that the urban heat island bias is involved in the official weather station nearby. So just a little background. Anthony, with the support of Heartland and our supporters, have been working on what we call the GOATS project. GOATS stands for Global Open Atmospheric Temperature System. And its purpose is to basically recalibrate the temperatures in the U.S. to where they were when gauging temperature measurements began before widespread urban heat island effect, which that phenomenon makes it seem like, in the United States at least, that we are dangerously warming. Now, Anthony has designed and placed such temperature stations to negate that heat island effect, so that we get accurate readings of what the temperature really is. And we announced this week the results of your installation in Reno, Nevada, Anthony. Why don't you explain what happened here and walk people through it?
Well, this is the project I've been working on now for about 3 years, and measuring temperature properly is difficult. And when we've learned this through all the work that we've done looking at Stevenson screens and the MMTS things that the National Weather Service uses, and the fact that they get yellowed and so forth and so on. And so there's all kinds of biases which can creep into temperature measurements. The other thing that we noted is that a lot of the original airport stations, you know, the ones that were really, really early, like back in the days of Lindbergh, were grass fields, you know, and they had to take aviation measurements there. They had to take the temperature every hour and all that stuff. Well, you know, Chicago O'Hare is a perfect example. The three-letter identifier for Chicago O'Hare is ORD, but that's from when it was first put together. It was Orchard Field before it got renamed. And literally that's what it was. It was a grass field. So all these airports have turned into these concrete megaplexes. Reno, in particular, has a tremendous UHI signature, and I mean tremendous. And it has, in the past, been identified as having as such, but they just don't pay attention to it when it comes to the climate records. Climate Central, which is an activist organization, has gone out and, you know, looked at the temperature records in Reno coming from the weather stations that in the middle of the center of the runways. Great for measuring the airport runway conditions for flying, not so good for anything like climate. Now, back in 2009, actually, I did a study on what's up with that, and I made this graph. I drove a vehicle where I had a calibrated temperature sensor attached to the side window, the passenger window, with a proper shield on it. And I drove it at night from 11:15 p.m. to 11:39 p.m., north-south transect on Virginia Street. And you can see there, look at that, the temperature differences that I logged as I went along that path. It was huge. And that helped me strike up a friendship with Mike Alger, who is a veteran television meteorologist at KTVN in Reno, now retired and teaching at the university. But he was fascinated by this. And so we ended up collaborating over time. And finally, about 2 years ago, he helped me get permission to place a weather station at the airport. And it was just 1.1 miles southwest of where the ASOS station was, in the middle of the runways and so forth. And I logged data constantly over 2 years, every minute. We had an outage for a few days that we couldn't deal with, but we got that sorted out. But anyway, we had almost completely 2 years of parallel data. And then when we went and analyzed it, and the results were striking. The temperature differences on a continued basis were as much as 3 degrees difference, and it happened over 90% of the time. So the people like, Climate Central that are making claims now that Reno is the fastest warming city in the nation due to climate change, we can prove that that's not the case.
Excellent work. David, I'll ask you, I mean, how much faith have you had, or should the public have, in what is presented to us as official temperature data all across the United States?
Well, a lot of people like to say, that when you take the measurement, it's cast in stone. It was measured perfectly, and that data is correct. And anytime you're dealing with weather data, you realize it varies. I mean, I work with precipitation, which is even worse than air temperature. I mean, you've been in the case where you're driving along in a car and you're in a deluge, and all of a sudden you emerge and it's not raining at all, and you look back and it's raining behind you. And so rainfall varies considerably. I mean, I am about 4 miles away from the Greenwood weather station. We get data from that Greenwood weather station. Never mind the fact it hasn't been there in almost 40 years. Because what NOAA does is it reinterpolates all the observations. So you think it's an actual observation. Instead, it's a model simulated estimate from surrounding stations so that they have a continuous record by which they can do their interpolation. I mean, that's not the way data are contained. And then, it gets worse with precipitation because everybody uses different weather observations. The French use one that looks like a bucket. The Dutch use one that look like it could use a beer stein when it's not raining. They're all at different heights. And the problem with rainfall is where you try to actually catch mass. And so we tend to underestimate the actual amount of precipitation that falls. And globally, it's about 11%. But it gets worse because of the logarithmic wind profile. Higher from above ground, you get the faster the wind speed. When you get lots of snow, you get more loss. And they have a tendency to put the snow gauges higher above ground in snow events because, snow builds up on the ground. So you get more loss of snowfall. And it's a mess. And we tried to put together for my dissertation was a global climatology of precipitation. And you have to deal with the fact every country has a different way of measuring rain, different way of measuring snow. There's discontinuities across the border. They change things. This is one of the things that bothers me is everybody shows the climate extremes index from NOAA. NOAA has put together this climate extremes index that looks at how climate is changing. And I think item number 4 is the frequency of one-day precipitation rates. And when you see this curve, they plot a smooth curve to it, and it is increasing over time, and dramatically so. And then the question becomes, this means that world is getting wetter, we're getting heavier rainfall, more flooding, and that the models say exactly the same thing. We know from the Clausius-Clapeyron relationship, warmer temperatures, we should have more water in the atmosphere. So when you condense that moisture, we should get more rainfall. It all works together, the physics, the observations, except I took one look at the record and said, gee, I know what's going on. So what I said was, look, in 1990, we started a project with the National Weather Service modernization. Before 1990, Every hour you had an observer that went out to a rain gauge that was sitting at about chest high, and he would stick a dipstick in, and he would measure how much water there is from the last hour and dump it out. And you do this every hour of every day. National Weather Service said, we've got to operationally fix this so that we don't have to have people doing this. So by 95, they moved in what are called the ASOS system. And the ASOS system for measuring rainfall is a rain gauge that's down around your ankles. It's a tipping bucket gauge, so it's automatic. And it's contains something called a wind shield. It cuts down the effective wind over the orifice of the gauge. So before 1990, you've got a rain gauge that's, about chest height, way up in the air with no wind shield on it. And afterwards, you've got one that protects the wind and is much closer to the ground, so the wind is less. And in particular, it records in real time, so you don't have an evaporation loss that takes place while you're waiting for the observer to get there. And so the short story to this is that what happens is we've got now a much better way of measuring precipitation and a much more accurate way. So the precipitation goes up. So what I did was I plotted that record from 1910 all the way out to 1990. And that curve is as flat as a pancake. No change whatsoever. Then I said, let's plot from 1995 to 2024. And that curve actually is going down. Now, it's going down because in 95, 6, and 7, they were very high years. So statistically, that caused the curve to sort of go the opposite way. But essentially what you have is this jump discontinuity of about 5 or 6% precipitation. And the answer is, if you put a smooth curve through it, people see that smooth curve and say, aha, that means precipitation is increasing, and it must be carbon dioxide because, by golly, that thing matches the carbon dioxide curve almost perfectly, except it's all serendipity. Has nothing whatsoever to do with carbon dioxide, has everything to do with the fact that between 1990 and 1995, we changed the way in which we measure precipitation. Now, the other interesting thing is they said, well, this happens much more in the Northeast than it does in the Southwest. So you start to look at why is that? If you look in the Northeast, we have a lot of weather stations at airports, and they tended to be these first order weather stations. So they didn't need to add in a lot of the co-op data. Co-op data weren't changed in 1990 to 95. So in the Northeast, it's largely the National Weather Service 8-inch rain gauge that converted over to ASOS, and that's where the biggest signal occurs. The signal is lowest in the Southwest. In the Southwest, we have very few, there's not many people living down there. So as a result, they had to fill in with co-op gauges, which didn't change. And so you don't get as much of a signal down there either. So everything that you read in that curve has nothing to do with climate change, has everything to do with rain gauge changes. And you can't, but the problem people don't understand is that measuring data is dirty. It's the one thing I agree with Tom Wigley. His argument was the data are dirty. So his idea is, well, let's go to the models. Well, the models are even dirtier. But nevertheless, we've got to recognize data are not what you think they are. They're not perfect observations at a local condition. And one other thing that I always point out that people don't realize, in the United States, we have one of the densest networks of rain gauges. We have about 13,000 rain gauges. Let's assume that half of them, for argument purposes, let's assume that half of those rain gauges are 5-inch co-op gauges, and half of them were the old 8-inch National Weather Service gauges. All right, so you calculate that, and how much area do we cover? That's a little less than 4,000 square feet. 4,000 square feet is smaller than the area of an infield of one baseball diamond. It's smaller than the one end zone of a football field. It's smaller than the penalty area of a soccer team. It's smaller than the area between the blue lines on an NHL. So next time you're watching a sporting event, realize that our entire nationwide measurement of precipitation would be, if all brought to one location, would fit some little area on that on the pitch or on the field that you're looking at.
Gee, David, I don't know. You're sounding a lot like a science denier to me.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. So, I'd seen the same kind of problems with the temperature measurements. It is very difficult to do it accurately. There's been different, there's been switches between, liquid in glass mercury thermometers, then liquid in glass alcohol thermometers, and then electronic thermometers called the MMTS, and then ASOS and whatever. And so all these things introduce biases. And, the climate crowd thinks, oh, well, we can adjust for that. We can filter that out. Well, no, you can't. You really can't, especially when it is so massive, the amount of bias, and they try this pairwise comparison and this other stuff doesn't work. Bottom line is the temperature measurements are not good. As David says, they're dirty. They really are. So I developed this system here, which you see a picture of the station. Now, I knew head on when I took on this project that a lot of the people out there would say, oh, well, this climate denier, he cobbled together this piece of junk or whatever, and it's not accurate and so forth and so on. They come up with all kinds of arguments like that. I will point out that those shields that you see, those three there, that is modeled after the USCRN, the United States Climate Reference Network, and the way that we set it up. And those shields are actually approved by the World Meteorological Organization, and they actually do a better job of insulating against, infrared and other kinds of biases than the ones that are on the USCRN network. They're less expensive, and they're made by a company called Bariani, and they're over in Lithuania, believe it or not. But they've been selling these things like hotcakes because they're so good. In fact, they did a test once where they spray painted one of these things black and looked at the temperature change in it, and there's no difference. And the reason is because the spiral nature of these things causes the vortex of air to come up into it. They're self-aspirating. So they work out really well. I'll be having this a station just like this on display coming up at ICC 16 Climate Conference, which we'll be having in Washington, D.C., April 7th, 8th, 9th. And you'll be able to get some hands-on and talk to me about it and see some other things I've done with it. And there's also going to be the ability of, if you'd like to get one of these stations or sponsor one of these stations, we'll set you up. Yeah, there's a monetary cost associated with it, but it's not anything like what you'd get out of the government. Those USCRN stations, they cost upwards of $30,000 to $40,000 each. Ours is about a tenth of that.
Yeah, you should email. I'm putting it across the screen right now. You can email think.heartland.org. That's just one of our emails, easy enough to remember.
Think at heartland.org. Yeah.
Yeah. Think@heartland.org. And then we can put you in touch with Anthony. You can learn more about how you can actually support the distribution of more of these stations, and also actually get one if you have a suitable property in your house. So, yeah. And as Anthony also said, you will see this you'll see this at our climate conference in Washington, D.C., April 8th and 9th. There'll be one on display for you. They're actually pretty impressive. They're pretty neat. That's April 8th and 9th in Washington, D.C. I have to tell you all that space is limited. I've been saying that for weeks. Space is almost running out. We're only going to have enough room for maybe another 20 or 30 paid attendees. So if you want to meet everybody on this show, if you want to see what a real weather station looks like and why they're necessary for accuracy across the country, if you want to not just meet David Legates, but so many wonderful speakers at this conference, you can go to heartland.org. There's a feature right there at the top that can take you right to our climate conference page. You can get more information. You can see the entire speaker list. And I can't believe I almost forgot. Our conference is going to be kicked off with a plenary breakfast speech by EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin. I've been told I'm allowed to say so out loud, so here I am doing it on our show. He's going to have a lot to talk about, a lot of great stuff to talk about. So we're very honored that Lee Zeldin will be joining us at the conference. Definitely, you want to be there. If you're in the DC area, you definitely want to be there. If you're not, you're going to want to fly all the way out for this. The program is fantastic. You'll never forget this experience. Believe me, if you've never talked to these people, if you're interested in this topic, it's the best. So hope to see you there. Again, go to heartland.org. You can click through and get to the climate website and get your tickets. Space is limited.
I'm not sure if I'll bring my miter, but if so, I may be selling dispensations there. So.
Climate dispensations from the Archbishop of Rancho. That's nice.
Yeah.
Speaking of the conference, David Legates, you are on the program at least once. What are you planning to talk to us about? Because it is going to be live streamed, so people can see it if they can't make it in person. But what's striking you to present on this year?
Well, the same thing I just talked about moments ago about precipitation measurements. So I guess you don't have to come to listen to me, at least. If no, I'll have a lot more to talk about and a lot more to show. But yeah, essentially precipitation, how bad it is and how difficult it is to measure.
Yeah. I mean, I've never been to. Actually, that's a good question. I haven't even thought about this before. David, you've come to, I don't know, at least a half dozen. We've had 16 international conferences on climate change. I think we've been to at least 6 to 10 given presentations easily. You've been given, you've well-earned climate awards as well at these conferences. Do you go to other conferences? Are you invited to present at other conferences? What is it like to go to, I don't know, a non-climate realism climate conference?
Well, I haven't been to one in a while. A lot of them, they get overrun by people that are alarmists, and they really don't like to have you speak. I spoke at a group, not Heartland, but it was a group like Heartland, and we got attacked on stage by people that rushed the stage. So hopefully, your climate conference will have more people in security than apparently they had. But nevertheless, yeah, these people don't want you to speak. And it's odd. If you're on the program, they try to get you off the program. We did one in Florida once where literally we were X'd from the program at the last moment because they knew what we were going to say and did not allow us to say it. And this was a professional organization as well. Well, a non-professional organization, but they pretend to be a professional organization, but they're acting non-professionally. But yeah, I've run into those kinds of issues. It's not fun.
Yeah, I mean, we've invited the Heartland Institute and our co-hosts, CFAC, CO2 Coalition, and What's Up With That. We've invited, I don't know, people that disagree with a lot of the scientists that present to our conferences in the past. You might remember Scott Denning, I think, from Colorado State University years ago, came and he didn't agree with a lot of the other scientists that were there, but he found the experience to be intellectually stimulating.
You mean scientists don't always agree on everything? I thought science was the idea of this is what we believe and you have to do that. Otherwise, you're just out of the group.
Yeah.
Oh,
no,
that's different. I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think so. And actually, what if you come to the conference or if you watch it when we live stream it all day, each of those 2 days, right here on these very channels, you will see that a lot of the scientists that we invite to present disagree among themselves. This isn't just some, this isn't some conclave of religious fanatics on climate. This is a collection of scientists and engineers. Some of the most interesting things I have learned about the climate, I've learned eavesdropping at the hotel bar, listening to engineers and scientists argue with each other about stuff. So it's really intellectually stimulating. I'm really looking forward to it. I can't believe it's only a month away. It's fantastic.
It's because the science is never really settled.
It's an immensely,
particularly the things that are important. Yeah.
It's an immensely humbling experience to go to these climate conferences and have all of these, truly brilliant people talking to each other and bouncing ideas off of each other and stuff. And even when you think that you're pretty well versed in everything that they're talking about at first, as it gets deeper and deeper, you just kind of like eyes glaze over a little bit when you're, at least for me, when I'm standing with some of the people that we have as speakers casually, their presentations aren't going to make your eyes glaze over, but like when they start to get into the depths that there was not time for in the presentation slot, it can get like stunningly complicated, and it's really fun. It's really fun to get to listen in on some of that.
Yeah, and we designed the program so that there's plenty of time, 25 minutes after each panel presentation, 25 minutes for Q&A from the audience. And that, frankly, is where some of the best parts of the conference are that. Not just listening to the presentations, but the interaction with the audience. It's really great. So again, if you can be there in person, tickets are limited, but you can watch it all streaming right here if you cannot be with us in person. All right. Well, it's also very impressive, and I do not have a segue because I had one. Again, I have a segue. I'm the king of the segue that was 20 seconds ago, and I couldn't get it. It's gone now. But I want to just get into something that's really important, and that is telling you about the sponsor of this here program, the Climate Realism Show, and that is Advisor Metals. If you listen to a lot of conservative shows, you hear tons of pitches regarding gold and silver and other precious metals. There are so many companies out there that can give you that service, but we want to tell you why you should trust our sponsor, Advisor Metals, and it's the man who runs the company, Ira Brashatsky. He is the managing member of Advisor Metals, and he doesn't employ those high-pressure tactics or deceptive marketing ploys like so many in big gold. He also doesn't deal in so-called rare coins that aren't even really rare. When you buy gold and other precious metals from Advisor Metals, you're dealing in quality bullion, and that is so much better when the time comes to liquidate this valuable physical asset. And when you buy from Advisor Metals, he will have your investment sent discreetly to your home. I want to point out that Ira is advertising on this program because he is an America First patriot. He does not donate to leftist outfits and Democrats. He refuses to work with the proxies of the Chinese Communist Party, and he, like us, abhors the machinations and schemes of organizations like the World Economic Forum and the United Nations. That is why we are so proud to have him as our sponsor. So if you want to diversify your investment portfolio, if you want to back up your IRA with real physical bullion of precious metals, go to climaterealismshow.com/metals. You can leave your information there, and Ira will be in contact to make the process very, very easy. climaterealismshow.com/metals. And please tell them who sent you, because that helps us in this program while you're helping your financial future. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And now it is time for Q&A, and we have plenty of questions. Take it away, Linnea.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I am, as always, looking forward to doing Q&A here. I'm going to get right out of the way right away the question that was directed towards me from our good friend Ray, who said, was all the limestone and chalk and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere previously life post-Cambrian explosion? So there's a little bit to unpack here for the audience who might not know what some of these words mean. So the Cambrian explosion is a term that is referring to a very large amount of an increase in the amount of fossil remains of various species that popped up around the Cambrian period. So that's 480 million years ago, especially when it comes to sea life. And so the question is, was all this limestone and chalk and some of the CO2 in the atmosphere previously life after this big explosion in sea life? And the answer is most of it. So these are a couple of different types of rock that we're talking about here. So chalk, like the White Cliffs of Dover, for example, which I think some of our audience might live near, that is all ancient sea life, at least their shells that are left over. So micro shelled organisms pile up over millions and millions of years on the ocean floor and eventually become this chalk. And so that is then all from life. Limestone is mostly, I think most of the limestone on the planet also comes from similar little fossil critters, but not all of it. And carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, much of it is from life, but not all of it. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere can also come from all sorts of different geological processes and chemical reactions, all sorts of stuff. So much of it was, yes. And the time scales that we're talking about here are pretty incredible and kind of hard to wrap your head around, right? So the Dover, for example, I think was deposited, that would have been 90 to 70 million years ago. And so we're talking about, this is mid to late Cretaceous. So this is tens of millions of years of critter pile up that we're talking about. It's not like all of a sudden it all went sunk to the bottom of the ocean all at once and got compacted. So it is significant. And then just for context too, like the Permian Basin in Texas, and that's going to be like Permian Carboniferous period, where a lot of our, if not almost all of our like fossil fuel reserves were deposited during that period. And that's in the 250 to 350 million years ago range. So that's even before, or no, that's after the Cambrian explosion. So this is hundreds of millions and tens of millions of years worth of critter pileup that contributes to these rock formations. So the answer is no, not all of the limestone and chalk, but a lot of it. Yes. Okay. So now that that's out of the way, can you tell I like talking about rocks? I don't know. I like paleo stuff. Okay, so this is a question from our friend Mike, who says, when you capture extra solar energy from space and you beam that sunlight onto Earth, how is that additional energy not going to raise temperatures? Also, go Blue Hens.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Here's the thing. Are they concentrating and adding more solar energy than the Earth would normally receive? That's the question. And I don't know the answer to that right now, whether or not that would, in fact, raise temperatures, or whether they're just simply repurposing. So, yeah, it would. Here's why. At night, we're going to get solar energy added to the Earth that would not normally be there. So, yes, it will raise temps. I just thought that through. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it would seem it would have to, right? I mean,
if we're smart, we can then stick out rotisseries where the beam is coming down, and we can have chicken cooked without using ovens anymore.
Yeah, let's hope that it's not concentrated if they do it. Let's
That's
see.
not a slap at the Blue Hens, is it?
I would never slap a blue hen.
Okay, very good.
roasted on a spit in the with the space the sun space laser.
Exactly.
All right, Gerard Marsh says, is there not already enough junk floating around in space? That's a good point too. We do have a lot of junk in space. And that's a lot of junk that can crash into it, which is another thing that Mars Rock asks, which is, with all the space junk in orbit, how will the mirror be safe?
Well, I wonder that too, because these things are going to be huge. So they're a big target. And there's already a concern about stuff that's in orbit creating a cascade failure, where we have one event where something impacts something else, and it creates such an extra debris field that it's like a domino effect, and it gets worse and worse. And the next thing you know, we have a very, very large orbiting junk pile made up of smaller bits and pieces of everything that's been destroyed. And that's really a big issue, because if you've got a ring of junk like that, launching stuff past our atmosphere and up into space is really, really risky. And so, there's just no really good upside whatsoever to this mirrors thing. It's going to make the temperature warmer. It's going to cause the light at night that people don't want. I mean, wait for the lawsuits to come up with that. Number 3, engineering it's going to be a nightmare, if not impossible. And then number 4, we got the space junk problem. It's just a big loser of a program.
Well, can you imagine trying to launch a manned space mission through basically a river of knives traveling at 187,000 miles an hour?
So we have this
be about 18,000 miles per hour, not 187,000. That's
the speed of light.
So Chris Nisbet says, taking the idea seriously for a moment, though, wouldn't the mirrors have to continually move around to get the angle of reflection correct? And that's true. They would have to have, basically geostationary, right, orbit. I believe that's the right word. But we've been able to do that for decades and decades. So I don't think that would necessarily be the hard thing. I think the hard thing would be, there's tons of micrometeors and stuff up there that are zipping around, smacking into stuff. I think you'd have a problem there.
Why don't we put a giant magnifying glass in orbit and then have it directed, and have it burn something on the ground to spin boil water and spin a wind turbine? That would work too.
That'd be a great savings, because solar energy is free. Therefore, that program would be cheap. Okay. Charles Rotter, this is for you, Anthony. Charles says, has there been any trend in temperature maximums near the equator?
I don't know. I don't have the data to answer that question. And so that's what I'm going to say. I just don't know. And that's okay to do in science. Some of these scientists out there, you ask them a question and they start getting into speculation. I don't know, so I'm not going to speculate.
All right. Oh yeah. So I'm gonna send this one to you, David. So Gerard Marsh says these climate change advocates are so confident that they only use the words might, may, and could. So it's not really proven, is it?
No, and that technically that's the correct way of phrasing it. It might, may, could, because we don't really know everything at any given time. So our best guess would be this, that, and the other. However, future information could prove us wrong, and that's the way science really progresses. But they want to say that everything is finished. This is the way it happens. Climate change is going to destroy the planet unless you do X, Y, and Z in the next 24 hours to save it. We're all going to burn up in a fireball, and that's not science.
This is one of those things where attribution studies are really at error, right?
Yeah.
Attribution studies don't say might. What they say is 30% more likely.
Yes.
80% more likely it occurred. It's 80% more likely to have occurred because of climate change. Not maybe it was influenced, not there's some possibility. No, it's much more likely because of climate change. And we can give you a percentage. We can tell you how much.
So, okay. Carrie, I don't think I've seen you in the chat before. So Carrie says, when did the Google or YouTube warning versus Heartland go away? It used to be right below the screen. I think they put it on after the video goes, like it stops being live, maybe. I'm not sure. Jim?
I think once you, I think this has happened with me because I've heard conflicting information on this. Some people say they see it. Some people say they don't. I think once you click the little box to get rid of it one time, it stops showing up. If that's the case, that's a huge improvement over what it used to be. There shouldn't be any warning label on this show at all. It's a joke.
Yep.
Warning, you might be exposed to truth and fact.
Yeah, watch out. All right. So Paulie says, isn't the accuracy of most of those temperature indicators a full degree? Anthony?
Well, yes and no. Their accuracy is actually greater than 1 degree. However, there's been a longstanding rule with the National Weather Service observations that you round to the nearest whole degree and report that. So yeah, they're throwing away some data with each one of those. But the bottom line is that with all the other biases that are in there from heat and equipment and everything else, it's kind of meaningless.
Okay. And then this is a good question that I just saw pop up that I would like to address quickly. Jay Wester says, Professor Ian Plimer claims that CO2 levels were much, much higher millions of years ago, also during ice ages. Can you confirm if this is true? Well, I mean, from proxy data shows that it has been true, that the temperature correlation isn't always perfect on temperature and CO2. Would anyone want to add to that?
Well, I put out a primer on climate change probably a decade and a half ago and updated it. And the proxy data I looked at, it's from geological data. It showed no correlation between CO2 levels and temperature. There were times when CO2 was much higher than today. I'm not talking about, it doubled from 280 or 170. It was, a couple of thousand parts per million, and it was cooler for extended periods of time. There were times when it was as warmer than today, and CO2 levels were lower. So that's the proxy data. It's gross data. It's built on assumptions about ratios of chemicals and molecules captured in different types of source material, whether it's ice sheets, rocks, peat, whatever, shell middens. But yeah, no, there's no question that the CO2 has been higher than today, and it hasn't necessarily correlated with higher temperatures, but sometimes lower.
All righty, thank you. Okay, going back up here, let's see. All right. Howie asks, so it's been raining constantly on the west coast of British Columbia, the Fraser Valley, yet they're already talking about drought. How do we stop this type of fear-mongering?
I would just go down there with a bucket of water and throw it on their head.
Disavow. I disavow this plan. Please do not assault your local.
I'm kidding, of course.
climate
Yeah, don't do that. Don't assault your local climate scientist.
They must be using those crummy rain gauges you were describing earlier, David. So if they think it's a drought.
Well, it's scaremongering. You know, you know, when you have lots of floods, then we have to have lots of droughts too, just to remind you that, you know, we have weather weirding, or there's something
whiplash.
Weather whiplash. Yes, thank you.
And climate disruption.
And it's always something disastrous. Yeah.
Well, and in the end, eventually they'll be right, because there will be a drought in British Columbia sometime in the future. May not be this year, may not be next, but sooner or later, and they'll say, see, we told you so.
Yep.
And there's this is one of the tricky things that they do is, you know, they conflate different types of drought. So California might not have a meteorological drought where they're getting a below average amount of rainfall, but they could still be having a drought in terms of like agricultural drought or local drought, because their aquifers just are all used up, or their water storage is all used up from other things. So there's a couple different ways that this can go, and they tend to use whichever definition is convenient at any given time. All righty.
I think if there's a drought in California, we should just blame Gavin Newsom.
Yeah. All right. Polly asks, how often are the temperature instruments calibrated? There is a drift in the instruments over time if recalibration is neglected. Right, Anthony?
Well, yeah, I can remember going out when I was doing looking at all the stations to see, you know, how badly sighted they were. I was in this one place called Happy Camp, California, way out in the middle of nowhere. The closest weather service office to service it was at that time in Sacramento, I believe. It might have been the Eureka office, but I can't remember which. But bottom line is, yeah, it was the Eureka office, but it's 2 hours from Eureka and 4 hours from Sacramento. Anyway, I was talking to the observer out there while I was looking at the station and taking pictures and so forth. And the observer said, you know, I've got this problem with my max min temperature. The system that they use has this latch that allows you to hold it in place in a certain angle. And then you can unlatch it and you can spin it to reset it, which there's this little metal peg that goes up and down on the fluid. Anyway, she said to me, do you think if you're going by the National Weather Service office, you could get someone to come out here and help me with this? Because this part here has been broken now for over 5 years, and I can't get anybody to come out and service it. Well, gosh, you know, let's not worry about the long-term accuracy. It's more about whether they can get the guy out there, fix the problem, and get him back home in time for supper, because they don't want to spend, you know, money for overnight accommodations and so forth. So, yeah, a lot of these stations go uncalibrated and unserviced for long periods of time.
All right. Thank you. Okay. This is a good question. I'm going to direct it to both David and Anthony, but I'm going to let David go first. This is from Peter, who says, if human added carbon dioxide is responsible for climate change and 10 to 25% of the total is anthropogenic, how does the climate know which CO2 molecule comes from humans?
Has no way of knowing. Once the molecule's in the atmosphere, it's in the atmosphere. Its history is long since lost.
Absolutely. Anthony, will your temperature stations be available in Europe?
Yes, if you want them. I don't know. We've not deployed it in Europe, but we certainly can. The key to getting one of these, and we're not just going to provide these to anyone, by the way. You have to have a place to put it that's properly sited. If you don't have a field or something like that that is at least 100 feet away from things that are biasing, concrete, asphalt, buildings, cars, whatever, if you don't have a place to put it, we're not going to provide it. It's just that simple, because it would be pointless to send one out and have those biases be kicking in.
So I can't put it next to my air conditioner.
Nope. Not no way, not no how.
Okay.
Or tacked on top of your fireplace there that I see in the background.
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely. All right. So let's see here. What do we have? Okay, I'm going to address this really quick. I'm not going to get into a spiral about the fossil fuel issue, because that could devour the entire show if I let this go too far. We will try to have a show. I think we're going to try to get Matt Weilicki on sometime to do like a 2 geologists nerd out about rocks for an hour episode someday. But so Garth Bowen has a good question, which is, why do we assume that all the oil and gas was from fossils? Many planets have carbon that can be converted to hydrocarbons. This is true. There is a lot of methane and ethane and sometimes possibly pentane, although I'm not sure that we have actually proven that one, in space. These are not fossil fuels by definition, unless somehow, there were big swamps on the other planets that we don't know about, but we don't know about that. So as far as we can tell, these are not from biological sources in space. But also hydrocarbons that are simple hydrocarbons like methane are really easy to produce chemically. Things like oil are really difficult to produce merely chemically. And the oil that you find on Earth is a much more complicated hydrocarbon chain than what you find in space so far. I'm not saying it's impossible, but so far, that's the fact. The reason why we assume that not all, but most of all of the oil, but most of the gas that we find on Earth is from fossil sources is because we find them in locations where we expect to find it. So, petroleum geologists aren't just randomly going out there poking holes in the ground and finding oil everywhere. Not every sandstone deposit is going to, or shale even sometimes, is going to have oil and gas in it. But where you look for oil and gas are places where you know that there was an ancient creek bed, ancient swamp, ancient inland sea, or near shore sea. And so places where there's a high quantity of ancient biological debris is where you find oil and gas. So the reason why we believe, or we assume, that all of the oil and most of the gas on Earth comes from ancient living material is because that's where we find it. and so it's a fairly good correlation. You can't just pop a hole anywhere and find oil and gas. If that was the case, we wouldn't have the problems that we have today with siting, right? So I'm not going to spend forever on this because there's a lot of nuance and stuff. Oh yeah, and Charles Rotter is correct as well here in the chat where he says, not to mention you find traces of original organisms. This is part of the reason why petroleum geologists will also sometimes have backgrounds in paleontology, is because you're not going to find, like, when we say fossil fuels, we're not talking about like dinosaur bones. We're talking about like microorganisms and decayed ancient plant matter. Fossil is just like a catch-all term for something that's been buried for a long time. It doesn't mean bones. Colloquially I can't speak words today. In modern usage, when you hear the word fossil, your brain is going to assume like dinosaur bones, but that was never the case. The word fossil just means something that was buried. So from the etymology or whatever. But so
don't tell Sinclair Oil that who's
I know I'm breaking hearts left
that.
and right.
Yeah.
My heart was broken when I got into, high school physics or high school geology physics classes and found out that it wasn't all dinosaur juice. So, but that's part of the reason why, like, I'll stand up for myself and I'll say, I'm not going to stop using the term fossil fuel. I get mean bullying emails and comments all the time from people demanding that I stop using the term. I'm not going to, simply because it's what we use in petroleum geology, and there's nothing wrong with that term on Earth. So, I mean, if I'm talking about hydrocarbons in general, then space methane counts as a hydrocarbon. But yeah, so we can't talk about this anymore because we could talk about this forever. But I wanted to address it because it is a good question, and it's not a stupid question. Because people just don't know this stuff. You don't get petroleum geology courses in like regular geology class usually. So I like to answer that question when I can. All right. Chris has a good question for David, which is, have scientists always taken model outputs so seriously?
I'm afraid, yeah. Early on, it was a way of testing theories. And so you put together a model, you use all of the physics you currently have, you convert it to a series of equations, then you convert the equations to executable code, you run the code, and my goodness, all of a sudden, the temperature of the Earth goes through the roof, and that must mean the end of the planet. But to some extent, think of it this way. A model is sort of a creation. You spend an awful lot of time building it. It becomes like your child. And the next thing you know, it's telling you things that are scary, and you want to believe them. And so it's easy to believe models. As you know, Tom Wigley said, the data are so dirty. Let's just look at models. It's so clean. Everything is perfect. I don't have problems with station moves. I don't have problems with new instrumentation. I don't have all these problems that we talk about with observations. I can get spatial measurements everywhere. I can average whatever you like. And then you stop and realize, but what were the assumptions built in? And in some cases, the error bars are much, much larger than what we had from the original observations to begin with. And so we tend to forget always the error bars, that there's uncertainty associated with data, but there's a lot of uncertainty associated with modeling, particularly based on the idea that we assume it works this way, and it may not. And there's a lot of things we don't know about the climate system yet, surprisingly.
I mean, the assumptions are key. Another key is whether they actually even do the math right. When I was in graduate school, I had the experience where I asked a professor when I was looking at some complex formula, I said, look, you do this all the time. How often do you go to a conference or read a peer review a paper and discover that the math was wrong? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, here's a formula. Honestly, I read this formula. I can't do this. So how often do you look at the formula and say, well, you got that number wrong, or that note right there, that denomination is incorrect? And he said, I've never known anyone who to check it.
Yeah. And most of these models are so complex. No one knows all the code. I mean, back in 86, when I was a grad student, I had a copy, I think it was a GFDL model in code sitting on my desk. And it was like 50,000 lines of code at the time. Well, now it's like, 20, 100 times bigger than that. Nobody knows everything that's in there. So you assume it sort of, it works and it doesn't need checking. But there's, I remember somebody else did a study. They took the same piece of code and they ran it through a number of different compilers. Same machine, same hardware. The only difference is how do you convert that from, say, Fortran to assembly language so the computer can run it? And there's different ways of doing that. And they ran the models and they kept getting completely different answers. So it was nothing that we could control on the end. If you assume the model was perfect, nevertheless, converting that from a computer language to the assembler language that the computer uses made all the difference in the world in some cases.
So this is kind of a good question to follow up that. This is from someone over on Rumble, JFKE farts, I guess. I don't know. Kefert, I don't know. So they say, I've been arguing with climate alarmists online. It can be entertaining, but is there any solid research supporting the fact that ocean warming is driving increasing CO2 levels and not the reverse? I think this is referring to like ocean warming in general, off-gassing carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there is that theory, but here's the thing. We can't actually measure ocean warming with a degree of accuracy that we think we can.
No.
It's a really tough cookie to crack. And even with the Argo floats out there, there's still a lot of uncertainty in it. So the theory is that the oceans will outgas their carbon dioxide as the planet naturally warms. And from a science standpoint, that's true. But what we don't know for sure, it really is, we just don't have the ability to measure the ocean heat content that well.
It's one of those things where when we're measuring ocean heat, we're using really disparate, ill-suited, often different measuring, different ways of measuring. When you're measuring ocean heat from buckets drawn up into a ship, or from temperature gauges outside of a ship's engine intake, water intake valve, and then you're comparing that to Argo, it's like, and you're just blending it as if they're all the same. They're all
Excuse me.
It's madness.
Yep. All right. One more question here. This is from Walter, who I haven't seen in a bit. But Walter says, theoretical physicist Sabine Hassenfelder on YouTube is critical of John Clauser's climate talk last year. Can John address this at the climate conference? It could be important for the climate realism cause. Well, I think John's going to talk about what John wants to talk about. But Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, I would not deign to tell John Clauser, the 2022 Nobel Prize winner in physics, what he should and should not talk about on his during his presentation. I guess the chance is not zero that he would just stand there and read names out of the phone book for 30 minutes, but I severely doubt that will happen. You're going to want to see what he has to say. I bet, if I get a chance to ask him, I will ask him about if he's even aware of what Sabine Hassenfelder has said about him. I would only give it a 50-50 chance he's even aware, to be honest.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
That is right.
And even if
that will do it for today's show. We have hit the 90-minute mark, which used to be an hour-long show. Now we pretty much have made it a 90-minute show, but we do that because we love this topic and we love our audience so much. It's always a great time in the chat. Thank you so much, everybody who's been here with us live. We hope to see you again next week. It's always a lot of fun, not just to answer your questions, but also to put your comments up on the screen. I want to thank our streaming partners again, junkscience.com, CFAC, the CO2 Coalition, Climate Depot, What's Up With That, and Heartland UK Europe. I also want to remind you that tickets are selling out. This is going to be a sold-out event, so if you want to join us in person, live in Washington, D.C., April 8th and 9th, for the 16th International Conference on Climate Change, please go to heartland.org. You'll see a feature up there. Can't miss it. Click through and get your tickets today. It will sell out. That is a guarantee. I want to thank our usual panelists, Anthony Watts, Sterling Burnett, and Linnea Lueken, and of course our special guest today. Thanks for being with us today, David Legates from the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. Well, again, we'll be at our climate conference next month in Washington, D.C. Thanks again to the audience, and we'll talk to you again next Friday. Bye-bye.
How dare you!